people are joining, and we're admitting people as they are coming in. So welcome everyone to our first research colloquium of the semester. And we are happy to have Dr. Nicole Patton Terry be the first one to do this research talk called "It Takes More Than a Whole Village: Lessons Learned from Creating and Sustaining University Community Partnerships." I'm going to go ahead and introduce Dr. Terry. Dr. Terry is the Olive and Manuel Bordas Professor of Education in the School of Teacher Education, and the Associate Director of the Florida Center for Reading Research, and Deputy Director of the Regional Educational Labs Southeast at Florida State University. Prior to joining FSU in 2018, she was an Associate Professor of Special Education and the Founding Director of the Urban Child Study Center at Georgia State University. She currently serves as an Associate Editor for the Journal of Learning Disabilities, a board member for the Society for the Scientific Study of Reading, and a fellow of the American Speech Language Hearing Association. Dr. Terry earned her PhD from Northwestern University School of Communication Sciences and Disorders with a specialization in learning disabilities. She was a special education teacher in Evanston Public Schools in Evanston, Illinois. Dr. Terry's research, innovation, and engagement activities concern young learners who struggle with language and literacy achievement in school, in particular children from race, ethnic, and language minority backgrounds, children growing up in poverty, and children with disabilities. Her research and scholarly activities have been supported by various organizations, including the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, the Institute of Education Sciences, the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and the Spencer Foundation. As an Associate Director in FCRR, Dr. Terry founded and directs The Village, a division responsible for creating and maintaining research practice partnerships with diverse community stakeholders. Taking a collective impact, place-based approach, The Village strives to promote reading achievement, school readiness, and school success among vulnerable children and youth. So that is our introduction of Dr. Terry. So thank you for joining us. Just to give a sense of the structure of the research talk. So Dr. Patton Terry will address the questions, and we will keep track of the questions in the chat, but she will also stop during the talk for moments and ask for questions from the audience. So whenever you're ready.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. We really appreciate you spending some time on your Friday with us. I thought, since many of you, given the numbers, are probably, there are people in the room who are probably not faculty, students, and staff in school teacher education. So we thought we'd welcome you to our colloquium series. This is, I guess, one of the positive consequences of the current situation we find ourselves in with the pandemic, that we can do this virtually. And so we welcome you to joining us for our monthly colloquium series, which really is designed for faculty, students, and staff to share ideas about current activities that they're doing, in particular research activities that they're doing, as well as other current topics of interest to the faculty, students, and staff. And so it's a real opportunity for us to share about the things we have going on. And so you get to be a fly on the wall as we share amongst each other. Keeping that in mind, though, I want to make sure the audience understands that the way that you'll hear me talk about things and the way that I'm going to talk about things is very much so in consideration of my fellow faculty, students, and staff in the School of Teacher Education. However, I do think we all can learn from everything that we're sharing, and I think it's a really nice opportunity that we've opened the doors in this way. So feel free to be comfortable here. We absolutely welcome you to our home, and we hope that you enjoy the time you spend with us, and we hope you leave here wanting to learn more about us. So I put up a few of our Twitter handles here. And I also put up a flyer. We actually, in the School of Teacher Ed, we have a doctoral training grant that is funded by the Institute of Education Sciences. So if we have anyone on who is interested in looking at doctoral study, please go check out more information about our Fireflies training grant. You can find that information at the website for the Florida Center for Reading Research, and I've got the link here for anyone who might be interested. Or just click on any of those Twitter feeds and you'll see a flyer, and click on the Firefly. All right, so what we're here to talk about today is this notion of how it is that universities can partner with communities to do research. And I've been fortunate to be a part of starting up two types of research practice partnerships. And we want to talk about the intricacies of the challenges and opportunities to doing something like this, because it's different and unique and not necessarily something we all get a lot of training on. And so we wanted to have an honest conversation about how you might do that. And so I'm going to share with you what my experiences have been and what I've learned about trying to do this work in two very different settings. So first, let me introduce you to the two RPPs, or research practice partnerships, that I've been involved in. One is called Atlanta 323 and one is called Read Up. Atlanta 323 is housed at the Urban Child Studies Center at Georgia State University. Read Up is housed at the Florida Center for Reading Research at Florida State University. These are two very different kinds of centers. So the Urban Child Studies Center is a college level center. It was founded specifically to start RPPs. That's what we wanted to do when we started the center. So it's housed in our College of Education at Georgia State University. There are faculty across the college who are engaged in that center. We got initial startup funding from our college, from our dean, to support the work. Georgia State University sits in Atlanta. It's in the heart of Atlanta, right in the middle of downtown. You can see the Capitol from our offices. And it's about 7 years old now. That the center was founded in 2013. So it was founded to be an interdisciplinary research center within a college of education, but that means most of the folks who are involved in it are in different disciplines within the field of education. And again, it was built to be an RPP. We started it to be a place where you could form these research practice partnerships between our university and our college and our local community partners, because at the time, in that context, Georgia State was really, and continues to be, sort of a rising star. It was really not well known. People didn't know a lot about Georgia State. They knew a lot about the University of Georgia or Georgia Tech, but they didn't necessarily know a lot about Georgia State. And when I would go into meetings with different partners, people would tell me all the time about their wonderful partnership with Georgia Tech and their wonderful partnership with Emory and their wonderful partnership with University of Georgia. And no one talked about what they were doing with Georgia State, which was problematic for me, from my perspective, because we were training a very large share of teachers in our local community, in the local region. We also physically, geographically speaking, were right there in the middle, literally touching all of these different communities. We're right there in the middle of it because of where we're housed downtown. And also at this time, I want to say, the way that Atlanta is organized is a large metropolitan area. There are about 13 metro counties, which constitute about 15 to 16 school districts. And every single one of them at that time had at least one degree from Georgia State, but none of them talked about us being a primary partner for them. And so that was a problem to me. People didn't know who we were and what we were doing. And so this center became a big part of that. Here in Tallahassee, where we are now, the Florida Center for Reading Research exists at Florida State. It is an interdisciplinary research center that is at the university level. So we report directly to the Vice President of Research. And we have faculty who are engaged across multiple colleges and multiple programs in the university. So we have faculty in the College of Ed, but also in the College of Social Work, in the School of Communication Sciences and Disorders, as well as in the Department of Psychology, which is in the College of Arts and Sciences. So we are dealing with more than just one college, and it also means we are dealing with several disciplines as a result. We are 18 years old, so we are a much more mature research center, and we were built to be a reading research center. So our focus has been and has always been on reading and improving outcomes for children in reading. So we have a very singular focus in that way. Although we study reading from different disciplines, we're still studying reading, not education at large. We're in Tallahassee. Tallahassee is a small college town, certainly compared to Atlanta. Atlanta, some people talk about Atlanta being a college town, but Atlanta is huge, and there may be 10 to 12 colleges and/or universities in Atlanta. In Tallahassee, you've got Florida State, you've got Florida A&M, and you've got Tallahassee Community College, and that's it. So people do talk a lot about their relationship with Florida State. And in many cases, it's their preferred relationship. So people are very happy to be connected to Florida State. It's to me, it's a very interesting sort of love-hate relationship. So we love our big university. It is one of the largest employers in the city. Everything, we love it when football's in, and everyone loves it, but it also is also all encompassing, and that can be a problem too, as when you're in a college town, that often happens with the university's relationships with its local community, because it's big and it's huge, and the way the university goes is the way the town goes. So it's a completely different proposition. Here, it's not about making sure people know who we are. Everyone is very much so aware of who we are. They might not know what we do, but they know who we are. And our initial funding here started with the legislature for the state of Florida. And so we got significant, multiple millions of dollars to start this research center, compared to $30,000 to start a research center at Georgia State. So very different propositions on the table on how you got started. In addition, these are the two mission statements for the two centers, and what you can see that difference, that in the Urban Child Studies Center, the focus is on education of young children in urban contexts. At Florida Center for Reading Research, the focus is on reading research. So they have very different mission statements and very different focus on what it is that we're trying to improve and what sort of outcomes we're working on. And that makes a difference in the kinds of partners we have and the kind of work that we do. So for example, at the Urban Child Studies Center, I used to show this slide all the time. This is the cityscape for Atlanta. And we sit kind of like right in there. Georgia State's right in there. But like, if you look at the diversity of our partners were the United Way, and they were local providers of early childhood education programs, and they were advocacy groups at the state and local level. They were the Department of Human Services was Health and Human Services was a partner. The local school districts were partners, and there were multiple school districts, so we had multiple school district partners. The state was a partner. Different foundations were at play there, and they were a partner. So the local museum was a partner. The local theater was a partner. So our approach was much more all-encompassing and trying to get these partnerships working and going, because of the way that Atlanta is organized, and because there are so many different resources and institutions out there that are trying to influence the lives of children. We felt it important to make sure that we knew who they were and they knew who we were, and how could we streamline our work together. At Florida State, we're a research center. So all of our logos are all of our research studies. And we have quite a few of them. I think we're up to over 30 ongoing funded research projects, $40 million or so in grant money going through this research center. So all of these projects constitute different types of partnerships and relationships with whoever it is they're working with, whoever their PIs are, but their focus is very diverse and very different. It reflects the diversity of FCRR. It's also national. So most of these studies have their reach in multiple states. Some of them have their reach internationally. Whereas what we were doing at Georgia State was really about what was happening in the metropolitan Atlanta area. So it's just a different proposition in the way the two centers work. So coming to Florida State, the goal was to start a division at FCRR that focused on taking this more collective impact, place-based approach, and focusing in on what's happening in our backyard. And what we started was a division that we've called the Village. And you can see, and we already read out what our mission statement is here, but really we're bringing it back. We're still focusing on reading, because reading is what we are and it's what we do. But we're also looking at reading as it relates to performance and achievement in school, as it relates to school readiness, and as it relates to overall global school success. And we're also centering children who are vulnerable to not do well in school. So children with disabilities, children from diverse backgrounds. We're trying to bring that focus in. It's not that FCRR hadn't done work with those student populations before, but the idea or the proposition to center it in such a way to say that we as an institution can make a difference in outcomes for those students in our own backyard, that's what we're trying to do here. And so we have to think very we had to think a lot about how it is we partner with people to make that happen. So right now our structure is that there are three different ways that the village can partner with you. The first is we can connect you, right? So we're a research center. We know a lot about evidence, and we know a lot about research, and we know a lot about being able to look at programs and practices and resources and things and try to help people direct them to things that we think should show promise, or maybe there's a research evidence or a foundation that tells you that it should work. And so people often do come to us and say, should I use this program? What about this strategy? Do you happen to know what to do to serve young children with significant disabilities? Our role is to connect them, to help them find the answer. And that often means that we don't have the answer. Someone might come and ask me, what do I do about 9th grade algebra? I don't know, but I know we're at a university that has a very large college of education, and there are people in there who study math. Somebody there might know. Can I make the connection between them as a community partner and that faculty person or that research center that we have on campus, or whoever it is that might be able to find the answer for them? So we can be a connector. We can be a champion. Oftentimes when you're working in communities where people are vulnerable, where there are vulnerable populations or distressed communities, people often want to go in there and fix it. Something wrong, so we need to go there and solve this problem. But the reality is the people who live there are doing things to support themselves. They don't always want to hand out. Often they just want to hand up. And what your role can be is showing up, being there for them, to support them in whatever it is that they're doing. Every school has a literacy night. Can I just come to your literacy night, right? Every school has a PTA. What do you need help with at your PTA? Every community has nonprofits who are trying to do something around the areas that we're all interested in. They might want to do STEM and you're a STEM researcher, but they might just want to do stuff with kids and you do things with kids too. So can you show up to those things, right? So we try to find out what are the events, what are the programs, what are the initiatives that are happening in the local community that align with our mission in one way or another, and we literally show up. That's what we do. And remember, in a college town like this, where the university is a big, huge player, it is important when FSU's logo shows up. And sometimes that's all they need, right? So whatever you can do to champion what they've got going on is a helpful thing. And then finally, there's collaboration. And that's where we try to do research studies or projects together. So a partner will have a question that they need an answer to. Or they maybe think they have an answer, but they need to figure out how to talk about that and how to act upon that. That's where we try to come in and try to do more collaborative things together to really drive home whatever is the thing that they are doing. Again, in this scenario, they're asking the question, they're asking the research question. We're trying to see what our added value could be to helping them solve the answer to that question, and not just answer it, but then act on it. So we we're only been at Florida State for 2 years. So we're about 2 years old at the village. And so, but we've made some good progress on starting to partner with different organizations locally and across the state to push this initiative forward inside of FCRR. Another important part of that is the fact that we have something like FCRR. So FCRR has divisions in it. We have the village, that's our division, but we also have a quantitative methodology and innovation division that is there to support people in designing their research and thinking about large scale projects and quantitative and qualitative analyses and things of that nature. I've got folks I can go to ask these questions about. If I've got a school district or someone who wants an answer about their data, I have a division I can go to get some support and advice about that. We have a communications team called the Innovative Research Dissemination Lab, where we put out infographics. We have a very strong social media presence. We can come up with one-pagers. We can come up with webinars, we can come up with videos. So we can do a lot of really cool things with creative media to share information with our stakeholders and to engage our stakeholders. And if I want to do something like that, I've got a whole division I can go to help me do that. We also house the Regional Education Lab Southeast. Briefly, the federal government has written into statute that there are these regional education labs across the country. that respond to the needs of different geographic regions. FCRR houses the Regional Education Lab for the Southeastern United States. And so they have direct responsibilities to our stakeholders across the region and directly to the state superintendents, the state education agency, and all local school districts in that region. So they are very active in forming partnerships and alliances across the region. If I want to know how to get to a partner, or if I want to know how I can get something out to a certain group, I can lean on the REL to help that happen as well. And all these divisions work really well together and engage with each other in terms of faculty and staff and students. So it's a real infrastructure gift that we have something like this at FCRR that allows me to be able to do these things I want to do. That does not exist at Georgia State. So now that you understand what the two are, the two partnerships that I have formed between them, one is called Atlanta 323 and one is called Read Up. Atlanta 323 is a partnership that's with Atlanta Public Schools, as well as the three largest Georgia pre-K providers in the state of Georgia. They happen to be, I should say pre-K providers, the largest Head Start providers in the metro Atlanta area, Sheltering Arms, Easter Seals of North Georgia, and the YMCA. So together they capture a large percentage of 4-year-olds who will be matriculating into Atlanta Public Schools. And so that project was focused on helping this partnership group build a cohesive preschool to 3rd grade early learning system. General idea is there's a bunch of data in pre-K and there's a bunch of data in K-3 that should help us understand who kids are, how they're functioning, what their needs are across that pipeline. But those data were not connected to each other. And we thought that if the city of Atlanta wants to build a comprehensive preschool to 3rd grade early learning system, which has a lot of pieces associated with it, one piece that really matters is the data. And so what we were trying to do was figure out how to get the data together and then act on the data together as a team, not as individual entities, but as a team to ensure a seamless pathway for children from preschool through 3rd grade in the city of Atlanta. Read Up is a partnership between FCRR and the local school district, Leon County Schools, focused on reading achievement for kids from preschool through 12th grade, because Leon County Schools serves children from preschool through 12th grade. Here, our focus is on reading achievement, school readiness, and students with special needs, because those are the areas they said they wanted to focus on and improving outcomes for them. So some overlap in terms of dealing with education issues, but those are what the two partnerships are in general, okay? I'm gonna stop for a moment and see if anybody has any general questions about the two partnerships and the context in which we're having these partnerships function. Okay. So now that you have general understanding of what they are, I think it's important to think about the lessons that I'm learning about starting these kinds of partnerships and sustaining those kinds of partnerships. Because in my opinion, it's easier to start them than to keep them going. It's really hard to keep them going. But there are 4 sort of fundamental lessons that I think I've learned, irrespective of the two contexts in which I'm doing these partnerships. The first is that context matters. If you decide that you want to partner with a school or a community or an organization or a district or state or what have you, those entities exist in a place. And place matters for how it is that you function, right? As the research entity or as the partnership or the practitioner entity. They exist in a community. And that community has historical and social and political and cultural aspects to it, and that will govern how you do your work. It'll govern what you focus on, it'll govern how you focus on it, it'll govern why you focus on it, and it'll govern who you focus on it with. So you have to think about your place. And whatever it is that you want to do from a research standpoint, how does that function or matter in your place? And again, place might be your local community, place might be the state, place might be multiple states. Maybe got a 3-region partnership happening here. it doesn't really matter. You still need to understand that place. For me, what I've learned is that you have to think, I sit in the university, and in all these situations, I sit in a university. So you have to think about how the university has functioned in that place. That's why I spent a lot of time talking about who's Georgia State and who's Florida State. And we function very differently in our places, and that matters to what we do. You also have to think about the fact that any partnership has power dynamics associated with it. So you as a researcher want to build this knowledge, right? And knowledge is power. But how did the evidence get made in the first place? You have to think about who's at the table. Why are they at the table? Who got invited to the table? Whose table is it? Are you setting the table, or is it their table and you just want to get to the table, right? So you need to think about all those power dynamics and what your role is and place is in that. This organization called Chicago Beyond, they had created a toolkit around this very issue, specifically as it relates to equity. And they talk a lot about equity issues in creating research knowledge. And I love this title in the first place. This is a quote from one of the people in their communities they work with in Chicago. And his question is, why am I always being researched, right? Because we do that. I do that too. We go into communities where things are not good. And I think my research can help it be better. But how many studies have we done on poor Black kids in Chicago? And is it any better for them? And if it's not any better for them, then why should they keep doing research with you, right? So what's your added value? And not just you, but the whole system. How does funding play into this, right? How does accountability play into this? When you write things and present things, who owns that? Who owns this data? What's the authorship like, right? All of those are important questions. So I personally think that this toolkit is very helpful in thinking about those issues and unpacking those things for yourself. But I also think you just need to sort of find out where you are and where it is you want to do the work. So when I got here, I went to the school district's website and looked at all the information about the school district so I can understand who they were. I looked at data across the state of Florida. This is data from United Way. This is data from the chamber. The Florida Chamber has its own scorecard that looks at several different data indicators for what things are happening in the state of Florida. This is the Florida DOE's website. Florida is such an open records kind of state that there's a ton of data and ton of information out there that you can use to look at things at the county level, at the city level, even at the census tract level to understand the communities in which you want to work. So I spent a lot of time making sure I understand what this place is. And for me, that was important because I'm new here. So the only frame I had for Tallahassee was that we used to drive through here to get to the beach to vacation when I was a kid. And Florida State was here. And Florida A&M was here. That's all I had about Tallahassee. So I needed to understand much more about this place if I decided to be in a partnership with the school district here. So that means I also looked at the newspaper, but I also looked at reports that have been commissioned by people who live here to work on the very issues I'm interested in. So there was a report commissioned in 2017 about resegregation of schools in Florida. Anybody know that? I found out because I Googled, right? There was a commission in Leon County about community health, or a community health assessment. Actually, they do a community health assessment depending on the provider every year here. Those reports are publicly available. ProPublica has this website that looks at data from school district data to look at lots of different things like percentage of kids who are in AP courses and passing on state tests and things like that. That data is out there. You can go find these data tools and look at them and then read the local paper. I am always amazed by how many people don't read their local paper, but you can find a lot out about what's happening in the community just by reading the local paper. There are other places like this is Kids Count is another site. It's a data center where you can get data. And most of these places you get data across the country. There's a site here at opportunity.org. This is Stanford. They have a large site that they use to get data. Diversity data and kids.org. This one has much more to do with health and well-being kinds of data. Lots of places you can go to get data that helps you understand linking people to their place, right? And my approach is taking a place-based approach. So I want to understand the people in my place. So I went and found this data. You can go and find this data to understand your context. Okay. Any questions about looking at these sources and context? And before you ask, yes, I'll make this presentation available so you can go in and get the links. Okay, so then the second thing that I've learned is that an authentic partnership is a non-negotiable. So what that means to me is it's both personal and professional. I am trying to go into places that are working with very vulnerable populations, and they're going to say yes or no as to whether or not I can be in their space. If I don't take that very personally, then I have no reason to believe that they should let me be in their spaces, right? They're already doing very difficult things typically on a daily basis. They don't need another person in their space. So I'm saying that I could have some added value to support them with whatever it is that they want to do. That should be personal to me, not just professional to me. So for me, it's both things. And for me, that means that I get to know who these people are because they are people, right? So I get to know the principal, and I get to know the parents, and I show up for the school board meetings, and I show up for the Title I Advisory Committee meetings. And sometimes I might be invited to a community event. Here in Tallahassee, there was a local community event. There was a kickball game. My family and I went to the kickball game, right? So it doesn't mean that you show up to everything, and there could certainly be places where you yourself feel like you don't want to be. Maybe you're not comfortable going to some places, that's fine. But showing up in these spaces where you can engage with people in authentic ways, I think matters. And if you're not comfortable with that, I would suggest, you don't have to do it my way, but I do suggest that you gotta get comfortable engaging with people in vulnerable in places where maybe you are vulnerable, but they're not. And they're standing from a much stronger position because that's where they're comfortable. And you have to think about that. For me, as it relates to making these partnerships, it's both top down and bottom up. So I'm not just looking at the state superintendent, and I'm not just looking at my school district superintendent that I'm interested in. I'm also talking to principals. I'm also talking to teachers, and I'm also talking to parents. So I'm taking a top down and a bottom up approach. And I'm also reaching outside too, because things that happen in schools aren't just related to things that happen in schools. We know that what happens in schools is often driven a lot by what's happening outside of school doors, by what's happening in those communities. So who are the big drivers and the big players in that local community? And I try to make sure I know who they are and engage with those organizations as well. I cannot overemphasize the importance of showing up, being present, having people see your face, looking familiar to someone because you keep showing up really, really matters. It might be the most important thing. You have to show up. Just being present says a lot to people.
Nicole, we do have a question if you are in a place to pause.
Sure.
Okay. Jamal asked, to the thought about communities letting or not letting one into their space, how does your subject position inform your research context? Do you think your strategies for engagement would be different if your subject position were different?
I don't understand what subject position means. I don't know what that technical term means.
Jamal, maybe you could clarify?
Mm-hmm.
Positionality, he says.
I still don't know what that means. What does positionality mean? What do you mean?
Jamal, feel free to unmute and you can ask your question.
Yes, please do.
My apologies.
That's all
good
right.
afternoon,
That's
everyone.
okay.
Absolutely. What I'm meaning to get at is the idea of varying degrees of socio-political and ethno-racial privilege within different relative contexts. So were a Black researcher or a person who identifies as a Black human and a researcher going into a community that is predominantly Black, are there different affordances that they have access to given their shared ethno-racial identity versus if their ethno-racial identities were not opposed, but just different? Same idea about a Black researcher going into a white context, a white researcher going into a Black context, things like this. How do they open and close opportunities and access?
So yeah, I think that is a very real issue and something that you as the person who wants to be in needs to consider. So you're absolutely right about that. I tend to do research on poor Black and brown kids. So I tend to go into places where people look like me. They look like my kids, they look like my family. And I don't always have to overcome that hurdle, but that's not always entirely true. And so I think you do have to think about it. So let me give you an example. Here in Tallahassee, we have 2 public universities. One is a historically Black college and university, Florida A&M. It's the #1 in the country, as a matter of fact. Their ranking just came out. And Florida State is a predominantly white institution. Ranking just came out. We're top 20 again too. So yay, 2 all-star universities here. One thing I absolutely noticed when I got here and was trying to make my way around and into spaces, being from Florida State was not always a good thing. The Black community here is very proud of Florida A&M and really privileges Florida A&M and will definitely make sure they show up for Florida A&M. And I'm not coming from Florida A&M. So I had to know that, accept that, and understand that when I walked into a room, why someone might be much more interested in introducing someone else to them and not me, because I'm not coming from Florida A&M. So that was an issue that I continue to deal with here. Another issue related to that is the historical context in which these universities function here. So you have to know, and I made sure I knew, that Florida A&M has, like most other historically Black colleges, has always had this issue with the state and with others in terms of keeping them open, right? So lots of colleges, historically Black colleges and universities, are often in danger of being closed. Florida A&M is no different. And there's historical precedence here in our country with other predominantly white institutions taking over those colleges because they might get funding from the state. And so they take the money and say, your university isn't doing what I need you to do. So we're just gonna collapse you into this other university, right? And remember that Florida A&M and Florida State are both public institutions. They both get money from the state. So this state on more than one occasion has proposed to close Florida A&M and pull it into Florida State. In recent history. It's not that old of a history. So I knew that coming in here, and let me tell you, everybody else who lives here knows that too. So, and they will remind you in case you don't know. So they know what their position is related to the university. They know the differentials in their budgets. They know the differentials in the respect that they get. So it is a very much so present issue here in Tallahassee. So even me being a person, there are plenty of meetings I went to when I first got here where people said, we don't go in those schools because they're Florida A&M schools. That's their territory because they're closer to Florida A&M. It just turns out the populations I'm most interested in working with and stuff that I do where I have my gifts and talents and strengths to bring to the table are with the people in those schools. So I'm going in those schools. I got to figure out how to manage those politics. And so I made sure I knew who the school board member was that governed those schools. I made sure I knew who the principals were who governed those schools. I made sure I understand the social political context here for what happens in those schools and those neighborhoods. I made sure I knew who some of the nonprofits were, who some of the churches were, who are the different organizations around here. I made sure I knew what the football team was doing that year and what everybody else was doing that year. I knew that there are questions about the stadium that's in the news right now. Today, it's front page news yesterday about money for a new stadium at Florida A&M and how recently that got taken away. Like I made sure I knew all of those things. So when I walked into these conversations, I wasn't just saying, hey, I'm Black, so can I come too? That's not good enough, right? They needed to know that I wasn't there as an interloper and I wasn't there trying to take advantage and I wasn't there as others from Florida State have been in the past who've taken advantage of those communities, who continue to take advantage of those communities. You have to know it. You have to accept it and pay attention to it in your approach. I can tell you that the people who, I have had more than one conversation with the people who clean our building, who remember when their parents and their family members couldn't walk up the hill across the track to step foot on Florida State's campus. They remember that in their recent history. So, and those are the people who clean our buildings at Florida State. So I know that. And because I know that, I tread carefully on how I engage in those communities.
Thank you so much for your thorough answer. It sounds, what I heard is that there's a socio-political context, there's a historical context, and maybe there might be familiarity, but that's never going to be enough. You have to really actively engage in the community. So thank you for communicating that to me.
You said that perfectly. Thank you.
Nicole, just a quick time check. It's 1:44, just to give you a heads up.
Oh, wow. Okay. So then let me get through the next two. Funding and infrastructure. So to do things like this, you do need money to keep these things going. But I never have found, or thus far, like I've done it so much, but thus far I've never found that I needed the funding to do it, to get started. I think you need the funding to keep it going, but you don't necessarily need the funding to start on what it is that you're doing. Both of these partnerships started before there was funding to do it. Eventually, we got funding in Atlanta from IES and from the Spencer Foundation to do those that partnership work, and that funding is now gone, but the partnership isn't gone away. Here in Tallahassee, the funding that I have was the startup monies I got when I moved to here as a new faculty member, but I don't have funding for this partnership. So I don't need the funding to get started. And that probably is a part of the authenticity part of this proposition on the table. You don't need the money to get started, but you do need the money to keep it going. I think the infrastructure involved in keeping these partnerships moving, so they're not just a handshake, but they're actually a part of what you do. The infrastructure support is really necessary, and often that does take money. It takes something to help. So we talked about the infrastructure I have at FCRR that helps me do what I do here, that I'm not paying for out of my budget, for example. I also find, though, that other strategies you can do is how much can you embed yourself in the structure of the place? So they have meetings. Can you just come to their meetings instead of setting up a separate meeting? They have initiatives. Can I be a part of your initiative instead of starting up a whole new initiative? If I am going to start up a new initiative, how does it wrap itself into whatever it is you're already doing, so that we're not really separate things? I am, again, added value. The other thing, though, that you have to keep in mind is there will be meetings upon meetings upon meetings. There will be a lot of meetings. There will be a lot of meetings to keep partnerships going, just like any other partnership. And I think it's important to remember that you need to, the strength, I think, of what we've done is we have a team. I've always had a team. I've always had lots of people who want to do this work with you. So it's not just me going in. So you can spread the wealth in terms of who's attending all these different meetings. That said, you cannot delegate it all out. If you don't show up, they know you're not serious about it. If everybody who works for you shows up, or only students show up, or only random people they don't know and who weren't there the day they signed a piece of paper show up, they know you're not serious about it. So you have to make sure you show up. It has to be a part of your schedule. So I am quite busy with meetings as a result. I'm embedding in the slides that you'll eventually see examples of a theory of action. I talked about having a document for both of my partnerships. I have a theory of action that guides us. A theory of action is basically a logic model with assumptions associated with it. We talk about our activities. We talk about our short-term, intermediate, and long-term outcomes. We try to make those things clear. For me, they're helpful, and I think for our partners, they've been helpful because they provide a touchstone. You can always go back and say, this is what we've done along this journey, because you get so busy with the work. It's nice to have something you can go back to. So I'll put that in there for you, as well as these two places you can go to find more information out about research practice partnerships. There was a consensus paper done by the National Academies on this work several years ago, actually. And then there is a membership group called the National Network of Education Research Partnerships. We have a membership in our Georgia partnership, and we have a membership here in our Florida State partnership as well. On this website, you will find a clearinghouse that gives lots of information on how people across the country are doing this kind of work from a research practice partnership framework. So I go there all the time. So I would suggest you go there to learn. I want to spend the last few minutes, and I'll just volley back and forth with questions, Lindsay, about as they come up, with things you might want to think about as an academic researcher, because this is what people always ask me, like, how do you do this if you're a faculty person and you don't have a grant and you don't have tenure? So what are you doing? So you're busy, but you're busy, you're going to a lot of meetings, you're doing two things at once. It is part of what you're going to do, and that's something you have to accept. But there are ways that I think I've done it that I hope will be helpful to you. So the first question I often get is, what do you do when you're not looking for a partner, you're just doing research? You just need to do a research study. You need a site. You need to do a research study on students with autism who are in preschool, and you don't really want to set up an ongoing, long-standing partnership. You just really need to get this data. You have a grant, or you want to go write a grant, or you need to publish a paper, so you've got to do this research. I think first thing you have to do is recognize your priorities and own that. It is okay to say that you just need to do the study. You've got to get the data. You've got to do the work. That's not a bad thing. That is our job. That's why we're here. It is very much so our contribution to society, because the evidence that we come up with and the things we write and the things that we deliver to the world as scientists and as researchers, that's important. So you should never downgrade that just because you can't put in the time and effort to formalize a partnership with an institution. It's different kind of work, but that doesn't mean what you're doing isn't good work. So own it. Also, though, think about the ways in which you can show up for them. So if you can't be a person who's going to formalize some big partnership with the school district, can you show up for their events? Find out what they got going on. What kind of things do they need for their partners and their families and their communities? Can you provide sessions? Can you do professional development? Can you show up for literacy night? Can you direct them to different resources? Can you volunteer on different committees? How can you show up for them so that there is some mutuality in the relationship that you have, and you're not just there just to get consent forms and data and then you're out of there, but you stick around and you show up before and you show up after. You show up before because you find out who they are, right? And what they need and how they exist in their places, and you stick around afterwards and try to continue to help them as you can, okay? Another question people ask about is tenure. So what do you do about tenure? So if you're at a Research One university, this stuff typically, most of what I've talked about typically counts as service. It doesn't typically count as research, and it doesn't typically count as teaching, even though it's embedded in there. I think, again, you have to recognize who you are and what you're doing and be careful about it. As a junior person, pre-tenure person at assistant professor level, this is dangerous to do, because it does take a lot of time. So you do have to be strategic and intentional and know what you're doing here. You can do it, but it is what it is. So make sure you understand that, okay? So for me, it was a lot of both and. I did do it while I was assistant level professor. So it can be done. I'm not that awesome. It can be done. But I knew what I was doing. I was trying to be strategic about what I was doing. So it can be a both and. What you have to figure out is how to get credit for the things that you're doing and embed it into your work. So a lot of what I did in these partnerships were things that I could present at academic conferences. That counts. A lot of what I did, I could present in academic spaces or non-academic spaces, whether it be book chapters or blogs or things of that nature. Those things count less, but they still count. So can you find ways to make sure that you can demonstrate this work and have a product from this work? For grants, so one thing you can do with this, you might be able to, through your partnerships, and perhaps they have $100,000 that they can give to you to be a research and evaluation partner to support them with this work. That would normally be $1.2 or $3 million in IES funding, but they got $100,000 and they want to give it to you to help you do the work. Find out how to bring that money in as a grant into your institution instead of holding that money as a consulting fee. Sure, as a consulting fee, it goes into your pocket, and who wouldn't love extra $25,000 or extra $50,000 for money coming into their household? But if you make it go through the university, it is external dollars, and external dollars matter for getting tenure. Now, when you get reviewed for tenure, there is a difference in the kinds of external dollars you get. If you get competitive federal funding, it counts more than non-competitive local nonprofit money. But external money is still external money. And demonstrating that you're bringing to the university doesn't hurt your tenure binder, okay? So there are ways to get the money to flow through. The main thing you typically have to think about is the indirect cost rate and how you can manage that so that it doesn't get sucked up with such small amounts of money. At Georgia State, for example, we had a conversation with our dean. That was the kind of money that was coming in. He allowed us some exceptions on the indirect cost rate because he knew that if they took the rate, it would take all the money and wouldn't be able to do the work. But he also knew that what we were able to give him in return, I was funding doctoral students full time on that money. I was turning those into research opportunities for undergraduates and graduate students. So there was credit hour generation associated with it. I was getting other faculty associated with it who were then able to go write their own grants. So this was faculty development associated with it. So there are ways that that type of partnership can be incentivized for your university, even if it comes in a different way for you. So think about how to bring the money into the university. I'm gonna give you examples in these slides of how I put these things in my CV. But for example, I have a section in my CV on research and evaluation reports. And I highlight when my students publish those with me, because in the tenure getting process, demonstrating that you're working with students on presentations and publications matter. So my students work on those things with us. And it also gets to go on their CV. When I have presentations at conferences, again, I would also indicate when it was a student so that they would know when they were there. When I had externally funded grants, again, this is one of those that was a small amount of money that came from another nonprofit, a local nonprofit, but I was able to give the opportunity for one of my junior colleagues to be a co-PI. Counts to be a co-PI on a grant. It counts for tenure to be the co-PI on a grant. So find the way that make these things count for you on your CV. What do you do about the students? So oftentimes when you do work like this, there's a part of this that is about giving students opportunities to train and giving them experience. Let them see how this works and how you do this so they can go out and do it too. There's also part of this about funding, right? So a lot of, certainly this is the case at Georgia State, everybody who worked there was funded on one of these projects and they were all students. It was a way that I was able to fund full-time doctoral students. But you have to remember that students are students. They are not staff. Their primary job at the university is to learn. That means they will mess up. And that means that they will require your guidance to help them push through, because this is a learning opportunity for them. That means it's work for you. You cannot treat your students like they're staff. They're not here to be your staff. They're here to learn. So you have to be careful about how you engage your students in this work. Get credit for it. Are you on their dissertation committees? Are you their advisor? Are they in your courses? Can you embed it into your courses? So you can get credit for it on your CV, absolutely, in the way that you engage your students, but don't forget that they are students. And don't forget that there is a power dynamic here because they are students and you are faculty. So if you put them in a position where they suddenly are functioning more like staff for you and less like students because you have a deliverable on this grant and they need to make sure it gets done because it's their job to go out there and do whatever it is, you are sometimes putting them in a position that's quite unfair and they can't get out of it because they're the student. So you have to make sure you remember and protect them as a student. Sometimes it can be even worse if the student who is working for you is not your primary student, so you're not their advisor, but you hired them because they needed full-time funding from a different department. So you hired them to do whatever it is you're doing with them. Sometimes that can be worse because don't forget, they have an advisor. That advisor wants them to do stuff too. That advisor wants to write with them. They want to present with them. They want to spend these opportunities to train with them, but you've hired them 20 hours a week. So now you've got a student who suddenly feels like they need to work 40 hours a week. So you have to remember that. Remember and keep your frame that the fact that these are students first, they are here to learn. You want to give them these opportunities, but they are not your staff and you cannot treat them like they are. I also think there's a part of that is giving, there's a part of this, and I hear this a lot here, and I think it's not something I heard a lot in Atlanta, but I hear it a lot in Tallahassee, this notion of students can do the work. And it's great training for them, the students, to do this work. Or students can volunteer, and they can go do this big research and evaluation project for us because we have such great students at Florida State and Florida A&M. This is great when given these opportunities. I think you run a dangerous narrative here if you're not careful, that if you've got students who can do all the work, then why should anybody invest any money in getting this done, right? If your proposition on the table is that you want to work with Leon County, now I'm going to pick somebody else, you want to work with United Way to help them evaluate their programs and determine whether or not their programs are doing what we need them to do for the communities that they're trying to serve. And United Way doesn't have a research and evaluation shop embedded in it, right? It's a nonprofit. It can't put that kind of money into what it's doing. So therefore, what you're going to do is get all your students to volunteer to spend some time working with United Way's data, which is really good. These are doc students. Let's get some stats in there, help them learn how to do that, right? And if you can build that machine and make it work on the backs of your students. And so when United Way goes to try to figure out how to get funding to get a research and evaluation shop, they won't get the money because they'll say, well, you got one. Don't you just keep working with these volunteers, right? And you run the danger of presenting the message that it's not worth investing in research and evaluation at United Way. United Way runs multiple millions of dollars of money to serve communities. We probably should know how that stuff is working. They should be allowed the money to invest in evaluating their programs just as much as they are delivering their programs. And if you don't give them that opportunity by only putting volunteers in this space, then how will they ever get it? So I think you have to be careful about how you proposition what students mean to this endeavor, a partnership, and making sure you keep them as students first. I'm looking at Lindsay, who's probably telling me we're getting close to time.
We are right at time. Yes, we have about 1 minute, so we can field a quick question or two. If anyone has something they'd like to ask Dr. Patton Terry.
Right. I also, like I said, I'll send you these slides. And I'm happy to sit around for a few minutes if anybody wants to talk for a few minutes as well.
That would be great.
Will the Zoom room stay open?
I think so, yes.
Okay, so I can sit if anybody wants to talk.
Okay, well, it is officially 2 o'clock, so I know others probably have to scoot out to go to different things. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Dr. Patton Terry, for this wonderful talk. And if anyone wants to stick around, like she said, we'll keep the Zoom room open. I like that, Zoom room.
Thank you. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so you can see people.
Yeah.
There you go. Hi, Gary Bingham. Really, no questions?
I don't see any, no. Just a lot of thank yous.
Well, when I send the slides around, like I said, all the links and stuff will be embedded in there. And then there are, of course, a few more slides that I didn't get to, but I do give some sort of how you get advice on how you might get started. And that'll be in there as well for anybody who wants it. And you can certainly feel free to email me at any time with any questions. I am happy to help.
Okay. Rob says he does have a question. Rob, go ahead. How are you?
Good. Sorry, I have to be real quick because I got to jump onto a 2 o'clock. But
Sure.
I appreciate your candor and all the good ideas that you shared. I have a question about one of the first slides. You mentioned that the focus is on vulnerable children or something. I'm curious how, obviously, children from an IRB perspective, minors are a vulnerable population. I'm curious sort of how you're defining that term.
That's an excellent question. So for me, vulnerable is not the IRB way necessarily you're talking about it. I'm talking about children who are vulnerable to not doing well in school, to not achieving well in school. And for me, it's a term that I had started to use more recently instead of at risk. And the reason I use it is because when we talk about at risk, at risk is just a number, right? It's just how much more likely you are to be at risk for not reading on grade level, for example. But it doesn't actually tell you why you might be more at risk. It doesn't acknowledge that. It doesn't acknowledge that you might be more at risk because you're Black, or you might be more at, you have dyslexia, or you might be more at risk because you're growing up in poverty, right? So I think when you talk about vulnerability, it allows the question you just asked, how exactly are you vulnerable? Why are you vulnerable? And it forces us to explain it. And so we are particularly interested in working with populations who are vulnerable to not being ready for school, who are vulnerable to not achieving well and experiencing school success for whatever reason in this community, in this place. And we know here that the reasons are similar to the reasons there are everywhere else. Race, poverty, disability, those tend to be the reasons why kids don't do well in school. And so that's why we focus on them.
Thanks. Yeah, I like that. I like that it could, you know, a child could be suddenly vulnerable if a hurricane rolls over their house or something.
Exactly.
Right? I could see that. I like that idea.
Exactly. Which is a problem here, right? Right now, lots of kids are vulnerable because in our region, lots of kids are vulnerable because they're growing up in rural communities. Rural communities tend to struggle with broadband and access to technology devices. So this digital divide that we're experiencing right now because of the pandemic makes children in rural communities very vulnerable right now to not doing well in school.
Nicole, Jamal has a follow-up or a second question anyway for you as well. Jamal, if you want to unmute, go ahead and ask. That would be wonderful.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for entertaining a second
Yeah,
question.
Sure.
I super appreciate a lot of the best practices that you've kind of distilled down and communicated, you know, things to be thinking about as we engage in different research and educational contexts. I'm curious about the process that you took in order to kind of understand and learn these things. Was a lot of it trial and error? Was it guided through like strong and specific mentorship? And maybe if you could discuss some areas of learning that kind of were born out of mistakes you've made.
Absolutely. So first, what I'm going to do is tell you that when you get this presentation, what you will see, I don't know why I ever think that I can do things in an hour. Can you see my slides or you see my presenter view? So you'll see.
Presenter view.
Presenter view. We see presenter view.
You will see that I put in slides here that talk about how you get started. Step one, literally step one, step two, and step three for me, okay? So you'll be able to go back and refer to those things, okay? But so for me, it was a lot of, some of it was trial and error. I didn't have a class in graduate school that went over this. I didn't necessarily have advisors who were doing this. So I went to graduate school at Northwestern. Northwestern is in Evanston, Illinois. It is very much so in some ways like it is here in Tallahassee as a college town, but Northwestern is a private institution. And literally there, you know, the university and then the other side of the tracks is where all the kids are, Black and brown and poor kids are. That's where I was a teacher. I was a special education teacher, literally across the tracks. Just like it is here in Tallahassee, where on the south side of the tracks are where the poorest and most vulnerable populations are. And so my advisors didn't think about these things and didn't really do this kind of work and weren't really showing us how to do this kind of work. So for me, it definitely comes from a very personal space. I care about whether or not my research and what it is that I do makes an impact on kids who look like my kids, right? And kids who had experiences like my brothers and sisters and I had. And so there's a part of that that is very much so about what I do. I think over time now, having grown in my academic profession, I have come to have a much better understanding of the power that we have as these people who walk around with these PhDs in colleges and universities. There's a lot of power we have. There's a stage we command. There are assumptions about what we know, even if we don't know it, that people assume we know. I am always shocked when people feel like they have to refer to me as Dr. So-and-so when they introduce me, and there's such reverence. And it's just a job. But there is so much that people put on us. And so I become much more insistent, but also much more comfortable in understanding what that means our responsibility is, right? So even coming here to Florida State, to join a reading research center, when I found out that the closest elementary schools to our reading center, so I could walk to them, they're within 2 miles, two of them within 2 miles of our reading research center, and they were the worst performing schools in this district when I got here. Now, not anymore, but when I got here, they were the lowest performing schools. They had some of the worst reading performance out of the whole district. And we can walk there. I literally drive by them every day. So for me, it was affirming for what it was that I thought that we should be doing here because clearly we weren't doing it if that was happening. And I felt like, so I do feel like we have this role and the responsibility to do it, but I also have a very real understanding and recognition that our jobs aren't set up to do that. So we have to be explicit about what are the strategies and how do you do that and how do we think about that, and not sacrifice your job, because you have to be here. So everybody on here who's a doctoral student, you have to be here because we have to retire. Somebody has to come take our places. So you can't be a person who gets the PhD and decides, nah, I can't do this. I'm sorry, I can't deal with the restrictions of academia, and I can't deal with this and that. I really don't care. You have to be here. So we have to figure out ways to make it so that you can stay here, so that if we're going to change the way this thing happens, you know, somebody who knows how to do that and feels comfortable with how to do that is on one end of the pipeline, and someone who values it, like the faculty are sitting on up here, who will eventually be the deans. They will eventually be the department chairs. They will eventually be the people who decide tenure. They're here too and can welcome you into that. But that doesn't happen from the outside. That happens from the inside. So you can't leave. I'll be looking for you, Jamal, like 5 years from now. I'm just telling you.
Oh, yeah. I
You
got
leave.
you. I appreciate you. I'm coming for your job, so prepare your life. Yeah. And but I'll say in closing, thank you so much for that amazing response. And hello from California, and greetings from Professor Charity Hudley, who is my advisor. So she's
tell her I said hi.
I will.
She'll make sure she'll make sure you don't leave. She'll hunt you down.
I'm sure. Thank you again.
You're welcome.
Nicole, it looks like Crystal has her hand raised. So Crystal, would you like to go ahead and ask your question? Hi.
I do. Hi. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be listening to you. And I guess I just have a question that is fairly selfish in starting out as a new faculty during a pandemic who wants to connect with schools. So I can't wait to see those slides that you're talking about getting started. And I've got great role models and mentors and my advisors that I've worked with who all just keep telling me it'll be okay. We'll get through this pandemic, and you can just keep trying to write those proposals and we'll figure it out. But it just still feels a little daunting of like, how am I going to go and moving to a new, like you just described, right? Moving to a new place, learning about the context and figuring out what's happening here in the schools. But on top of that, the layer of what is unknown in terms of digital learning and trying to ask, what do these schools need? They don't need me knocking on their door. These kids don't need me coming in and asking about their literacy and language skills when they're just not even wanting to be on a computer. So I guess I'm just wondering how you guys are handling that down there and what you're thinking. I'd love any insights.
If I can ask, so where are you in your starting out your job?
I am literally an assistant professor, started in August at San Diego State after a 2-year postdoc. Yeah, thanks. Yes, I got a job during the hiring freeze. So I have to be really grateful. But I just don't know how, of course, everybody's being so great about like 10-year clock, pause and all of that, but that doesn't make me feel like there still aren't children out there that I need to be out helping. Like I'm glad that we can pause the clock, but that doesn't really help in other areas. So yeah.
So we are struggling just like you are. I think all the faculty on here would say that we're all like hair on fire a little bit ourselves. Most of us, so we're in the School of Teacher Ed, so most of us are doing research in schools and in communities and with children and with families in one way or another. And so this current situation is bothering all of us. I even see on here, I see our fellow peers in speech and language pathology. So our peers in social work who do clinical things, they do clinical placements, and they are also sometimes in schools, and they too are struggling with what we do now. So all of us feel you, you're not alone. It is somewhat comforting to know that you see more and more people accepting the stopping of the clock and where we exist, but there is also this part of this engine that is academia and this engine that is getting tenure where I'm gonna trust it when I see it. Like I have a healthy level of skepticism about how much grace will be given when your time comes up, and how much people will or will not remember. So, and I think you should. I think it's fair to have to feel that way. One thing that we have done and I see some of our doc students on here still with us, is we switched from focusing on kids to focusing on teachers and leadership, principals and instructional coaches and people like that. For 2 reasons, or I should say for 3 reasons. One reason is because you can't get in the schools. Like they're pretty restrictive right now about who can even get into schools in the first place to work with kids. So that's one very real reason. The other reason is because from our partners, we meet with our school district people. I saw one of them, Dr. Gale with Leon County Schools is on with us right now. We meet with them and we talk with them, and they tell us that right now, the population they're most concerned about is their teachers, that their teachers are struggling and trying to figure out how to do school this way, whether it's brick and mortar or whether it's face-to-face. And in some cases, they're doing both at the same time. They're the ones who really need supports, and they're trying to figure out how to keep their teachers hanging on, right? And how to not lose them. In a lot of districts, we're losing our teachers right now. And so we've sort of switched to try to help them think about and help them focus on and help them accomplish whatever it is that they need to support their teachers. So one thing we're doing, for example, one person suggested or said to us that we were supposed to do professional learning for teachers on reading, and we really can't do that right now this semester. Maybe it's something we can do in the spring. So one thing we're doing now in the fall is planning that study and working together as a team to plan that study, and then also working with our school district partners to think about how we might actually do that study next semester. But if we can't do it next semester, maybe we can do it in the summer, right? So we have that contingency plan. But they also asked us, what can we do for principals and instructional coaches? And they want to know that because our principals and instructional coaches are really concerned about what it is that they can, how can they support their teachers? And they have a little bit more headspace to think about what are the best practices and supports that they can deliver in this space, because they're not teaching virtually and online at the same time. They're handling fires at a different place. So they got a little bit more headroom to think about things right now. And so that's one group that we would have not have been focused on, that now we're focusing on because they asked us to focus in on them, right? So we're just sort of, we're trying to be responsive, listening to them about what their needs are and trying to wrap our research and our areas of interest around what they need. It is entirely uncomfortable. I don't know, leadership is not my thing. Principals are not my thing. I think they're lovely people. I work with them all the time, but I don't study that, right? So that means I'm also reaching out. I work in a college of ed. I'm reaching out to my colleagues in leadership, and I'm reaching out to my colleagues in other areas to say, hey, turns out they need help with this. What can we do to help them with that? Maya's saying hello to you, Jaden. So that's how we're shifting. I don't know if it's gonna work. But I think that it helps me, and I hope it helps our team feel like we are helping them by focusing in on the things that they happen to care about right now, which just are not the things that we started with.
Thank you. No, I appreciate hearing that. And I know that there are partners in CSD and SLHS that are doing similar kind of pivots. We're just all pivoting around all around here.
We are
doing our best. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Does anybody else have any other questions or insights that maybe I or Jaden can help you with?
Look on his face.
I know.
Not today, Mom. Not
today. I know, it's Friday. We're done, right? So. Well, thanks for joining us. I know. Oh, go ahead. If you have
I was going to say, I don't see.
Oh, Michelle said, yeah, start by building relationships with teachers.
Yes.
Yeah, and asking them, how can you help right now? Absolutely. Yeah, I think we had a recent incident here where, so one of the ways that I try to make sure I show up is I like all their Facebook pages. So I watch what's happening on their Facebook pages and things like that. And I see when people post stuff. And so there have been issues of late in the news around things that have happened in schools, and people, this is a tough time right now. So there are oftentimes many more negative comments than positive comments. Just jumping on there and being a cheerleader for what they're doing. You know, one of our local schools, it was just on the news yesterday, they are doing a time capsule with their 4th graders at Oak Ridge Elementary, which is one of our schools, right? Because I saw that on the news and I saw it on Facebook, I went to make sure I I shared it on my Facebook page. I made sure I liked it on their Facebook page, and I sent a text message to the principal to say, hey, I see you, sis. This is awesome what you're doing. It's nothing to do with my research, right? But I think that's how you show up. Those are ways in which you show up for them, that 2 years from now, she will show up for me because of that, right? So I think any way we can find ways to champion these folks and make them feel like we really do care. We're not on the sidelines watching this. We're literally in the middle of this right now. We're part of it and we're there with them, right? They're not just subjects, but we actually are a part of this together. I think it really does help.
Jennifer, Todd, do you have a question? Or your clap? Oh, those are claps. Oh,
Jennifer
clapping,
used to be a
not hand
teacher in
raising.
Leon. Jennifer was a teacher in Leon County Schools not too long ago. We grabbed her away. Sorry, Dr. Gale. We grabbed her away.
It was, and I love it. And I have lots of relationships with teachers still in Leon County. And so it's a very important thing that we're doing here, I think. And that's why I wanted to be a part of it.
Absolutely. Well, we have a faculty meeting in 10 minutes, don't we?
We do.
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct. So
right. So we would love to stay with you all day, but we gotta go.
Yeah.
But come back and join us for the next colloquium. It'll be even better.
We probably should have. Yeah, we should have advertised that right now before everyone signed out. But we'll circulate.
Yeah, we'll circulate when we send, because I guess don't we know everybody who registered, so we can email the presentation to them? So then when we do that, we can tell people.
Yeah, Jenny's saying yes. I was going to say, I was going to follow up with Jenny anyway and say, how are we going to navigate the cloud? Because I think I'm recording to my cloud to make sure I get, and where to put Nicole's slides and all of those sort of logistical things. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you to everyone who showed up. And thank you so much, Dr. Patton Terry, for a wonderful presentation and a research talk that was really engaging, and just being you and authentic and sharing your work with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. See you in a few.
Bye, guys.
Bye.